Okay, so in this video we're going to work on removing wheel hubs and the process. The car we're actually doing this from is a Rolls-Royce Phantom 3, and which would be very similar to a 2530, a 2025, and a later 20 horsepower. The Phantom 1 and the Phantom 2 would be similar but on a much bigger scale, but you would see very similar looking parts. And of course Wraith is completely different to some degree, and the 20 horsepower has a lot of different variety to it too. So the first thing we want to do, so I should say, you would remove your hub in order to replace or repack your wheel bearings, to check your brake linings, see if they need to be replaced or adjusted, or if you're going to do any serious front end work that involved replacing a kingpin or anything else in the suspension, if you were going to take apart further into the suspension system. So anyway, so the first thing we remove is this sliding barrel. There's a strong spring behind it, that's what pushes it back out. These serrations out here engage with the serrations of the wheel nut, and then there's other splines on the inside that engage inside the hub in order to lock the wheel nut in place, to keep it from coming loose. But you still have to make sure when you put a wheel nut on that you tighten it down with a rubber mallet as recommended in the owner's handbook. If you didn't and you just let the splines keep it engaged, then you can fret away on these splines between the wheel and the hub. So yes, so you have your wheel nut off, and what I use is this device. So like I say, it's a strong spring. It's not a very thick wire diameter, but it does have some strength to it. So you want to press the sliding barrel in enough in order to remove a locking or retaining ring. And I think I'm going to put this on the other way around. So yeah, so locking ring is in there. Might be difficult to see from here. And also you have these reliefs in here which help to get something in there to pry that ring out once you have that barrel pushed in. So maybe if I do it with this nut on a little bit further, it'll be easier for you to see. So this can be a bit of an awkward process, but again, you just need it in there enough to retain it while you get that ring out. Okay, usually a screwdriver or a pick will do the job. There's two openings. I like to, really stuck in there. I like to put the opening of the ring near one of these openings that's in the hub. See it moving around in there. go. Oops. And be ready for that kind of thing. Especially when this hasn't been done for a while. Okay. We'll work your retaining ring out. And out it goes. I have a parts bucket aside here to put pieces in. And that's going to be the first item to go in. So then we can undo our retainer here. Again, if you let this slip off or whatever, the piece is going to go sliding back on you. Sometimes I just sort of do it that way to get the process done. And then so now we can see what the spring is all about. And then this is the locking piece. These splines engage in the hub and these in the wheel nut. And then the parts bucket. Might as well go ahead and take this off. Now we have another retainer in here that needs to come out. So first we gotta get this retaining ring out. Oops, like such. And the parts bucket, this is what this looks like. And then now we have a threaded retainer. Normally they are marked which way they come on and off. We have a special tool which has serrations on it. Looking to see if it has a part number. I don't see one, but we'll post that in the video. And yeah, so sometimes I just try it and see. This doesn't have to be in terribly tight, but a lot of times the previous person put it in there thinking that it holds the whole car together, which it certainly doesn't do that. Its only purpose is to hold this grease cap in. So if we look and see if it has been stamped for an on or off, it probably is, but I think somebody might have it in the wrong way around. So be ready for that kind of thing. So I don't see the marking. Yeah. Too bad. So, I'll just give it a try. Something that can help is you can bring in your brake adjuster, tighten it up a bit, then you can lock it. Lock your wheel hub so it doesn't try to keep spinning around on you. And use your, so this is the right side, and let's try right hand thread. Feels like it's getting tighter. Okay, so we're on the driver's side of the car, and this is a left-hand thread. So the other side will be a right-hand thread. So I'm also going to say that I'm going to do a separate video for the rear, pulling the rear hubs as well, since there's a little bit more involvement with some other pieces in those. It makes it a bit different. So here's your grease cap, still has grease in it. Here is your retainer that held it in place. And I'm looking to see if I see the on-off mark to give an indication of direction. I don't see it. So maybe once it's cleaned up we'll find it. But normally they are marked. Now we come to I want to unlock the drum now. So now we come to a split pin, a rather large split pin. If you have a car and the drums have never been pulled, or the hubs have never been pulled, you may find a locking piece on here, or I would call it a lead seal, and it have copper wire and a piece of lead that's squished in there, and it'll have some markings on there. And that was just to indicate that, to give an idea to Rolls-Royce, if somebody else had been in these hubs on, that wasn't them. Normally they're missing, but there are times where I have found those. So we pull out our split pin. Okay. Well, let's put that in the parts bucket too. And then we need to find a nice large socket to fit on there. Here. Okay, maybe this size, next size up, and that's the one. This is 3/4 Whitworth, as you can see there. This is a Craftsman Whitworth socket, probably something you don't find every day anywhere. And we're going to find out if this is right hand thread or left hand thread, because I forget off the top of my head. And it is right hand thread. Now the wheel nuts are all right hand thread. And when I say wheel nut, I mean these guys. On all these cars except for Wraith and Derby Bentley, they'll have a right hand thread on one side and a left on the other. Put the big nut in there, and then we retrieve our large flat washer. Sometimes it's the silliest things that can take the longest times. All right, and there's our nice heavy big flat washer. So now we're at the point where we need to pull the drum off. Let me just see. Sometimes they slip off surprisingly easily, but this case it doesn't. This is a puller, and this is actually an original Rolls-Royce factory tool. This side is for small horsepower cars and Phantom 3. This side is for Silver Ghost, Phantom 1, and Phantom 2. So we get that threaded on there a bit. sure it's on there far enough to make sure that you're not going to let it slip off and damage the thread. So, and this one isn't terribly tight, as you can see. Normally I would just spin this around with a wrench or a socket or something. I'll do that now just so that people get a better understanding of what's going on here. Okay. There we go. There are times I've had these incredibly tight to come off. So we're pretty sure somebody's been in here before, otherwise the seal would have been in place. So I would imagine that whoever did this before probably, we would say, knew what they were doing, because they didn't have things overly tight and everything was in place nicely. Okay, so now we see what things look like with the hubs and drums off. So somebody has marked this, looks like it's OR, or so that'd be offside bottom, OB, I'm sorry. And you can see some wear in the lining. So seeing as I'm doing a total restoration on this car, I am going to replace these linings. But if this car was in regular service and I would say that you still had a little bit of time on these lines, you still had a little bit of meat left. And this is what is called the auxiliary shoe, this piece here, and that has a spring. And this sort of tips, and the idea of it was to reduce noise, because brake noise tended to be a pretty big issue with these cars. We have these really good hard steel forged drums, and we have and they're very large, and then we have these very large brake shoes that are very close to clearance, and so that's the making of a really good resonator or noise like a bell. So they came up with this idea to reduce that. So anyway, that's sort of the extent of this video. There's a spacer there. If it comes off easily, I'll take it off and put it in the same parts bin with the other stuff, but this one's stuck on there fairly well. So we're going to leave it on there. So yeah, there we are. I take the puller off and I'll show you what it looks like on the other side of the drum. Okay. Ooh, lanternfly. Out you go. Okay. I'm going to take a look at the other side of the drum here. I think it'd probably be best if I take the camera off, maybe. Okay, so in order to take the wheel bearings out, you would remove, you have a little locking plate here, and then you have a serrated retaining nut there, And these are usually marked what direction they come off. I don't see the marking right away, but I'm sure it's there. So you can see these drums are pretty substantial. Phantom 3s have amazing braking power. They're wonderful cars for that. And I'll show you the stub axle. Maybe we'll add a little light here. And the brakes. Again, these are pretty amazing braking systems, especially for the fact that it's all mechanical. And as in typical Rolls-Royce fashion, we have a lot of nuts holding things together. They didn't like to go cheap on those. So anyway, that's the extent of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Okay, so now we're going to work on removing the rear brake hub drum assembly. There's a lot of very similar steps that were taken to remove the front. So I do recommend to review the front before doing the rear so that you'll be a little bit more familiar in case I miss a detail or something. So again, we want to remove this locking barrel first. I use this arrangement. There are other types of tools for doing this, and if you have a friend who has really strong thumbs, you can even have him push it in and have him release the retaining ring. In fact, maybe I'll even give that a shot. This can be lethal though. Well, it looks like somebody has not done me the favor of putting the opening of the retainer ring right at the opening of where you remove So we will use our tooling to and that's a note for you for when you're putting that back together. Make sure you put enough of the tab of the retaining ring over where the opening is, so that the next guy can get it out easier. Next time might be you. I'll see if I can. There we go. There's your retaining ring. Parts bucket. Again, it's very similar to the one, if not the same, as the one that was for the front. And remember, we got that very somewhat strong spring holding that. Put tools over there so that I don't. So now we have this very much same locking barrel. Let me take our spring out there. This part can come off. And we have another retaining snap ring. And this one. And again, you want to start that at the easier spot. Pop that guy out. Then I'll look and see if this one is marked on or off. Ah, right hand, right there. So is that the right hand side of the car or the right hand thread? More than likely it's the right side of the car. There usually is an on, off, and an arrow. I didn't see it on the front one. I don't see it on the back one either. Oh well. Since it seems very likely, well, the front one was left-hand thread, so we're going to make an assumption that this one too is. So we'll just lock this a little bit with the brake. Now, this is right-hand thread. And it is. These pieces out to the side. So there's our retainer. I don't see the on and off. Somebody's been beating on it pretty hard though at some time, unfortunately. This is the grease cap, no grease in there. So now we're down to the very similar arrangement with a split pin. People have been in here before, so we don't have our special seal, lead seal that sometimes is found in here. Okay. Okay. So now we pull out our split pin. I find these side cutters work really well with this sort of a thing. Gives you lots of leverage. You do have to be careful not to cut your split pin by mistake. Because if it's broken off in there or cut, it just makes the job a lot harder. Okay, now we get our socket. I believe it's going to be the same size as what the front was. And the idea of this nut does not hold the hub on like it does on the front. This just keeps the driving dog engaged to the inner splines and the outer splines. And the driving dog, what it does is it engages the axle to the hub. So yeah, so the driving dog is in here. I need my paper towel. I'll wipe that out a little bit. Right. So yeah, I'll wipe this so you guys can get a little better look in here. Driving dog. So you have these two nuts here for the threaded holes for the puller. Get you a little closer maybe. A little light on it. There it is. Those are 5/16 BSF. Sometimes what I like to do is just put a bolt in. Oops. And see if that's enough for it to willingly come out. Sometimes you get lucky, like I think we could now. But if you don't, then you have this pulling arrangement. And the part number on it is R2831. This is a factory tool. But if you're able to get that out without the puller, then it just makes it a little quicker. You might need to put a bolt on either side. There are times I've had driving dogs that were incredibly tight and took an awful lot to pull out. The more mileage, the looser your driving dogs can be, because it will wear the splines, the outer splines mostly. I think she's coming. There we go. So there's our driving dog. We got the outer splines. We got the inner splines. Take our puller bolts out and put them in the side and put the part in the parts bucket there. And we're working in there a little bit even deeper yet. And we look in there. So now we're at the point of getting to the actual nut that holds the drum hub assembly on. Lots of grease in there. And if you see, you'll see 3 small nuts, and they keep a locking plate on. You know, Rolls-Royce is always big about having some sort of a locking device. And since this is a pretty important item here, they're going to have an even more significant locking device. So you look in there. In this case, I see what looks like 2 BA nuts. I thought they would have been 3 BA. And they look very, very close to, I'm wondering if they're the right nuts. And they look very close to the edge there. Hopefully we can get those out without a whole lot of issue. Well, let's just try a socket. See, we're going to get lucky. So it's a 2 BA thread, but the hex is 3/16 BS. Let's see what we got here. I'll have to look in the drawings and see if these are supposed to be 2 BA. Give my noise trying to get the nut out of the socket. And then this one. And then this one. get those nuts at a later time. Right now we're going to get the locking plate that was holding those on and out. I believe. Here we go. Ooh. What the game shooting at me? It must have been a lock washer. Let's see here. Pretty goopy goop grease. And again, it's the little stuff that you think is gonna take a second. It takes significantly longer. Okay. This is what our locking plate looks like. I'll wipe it off so you can get a better look at it. So you have the holes, 3 of them are used for the nuts, and then you have the tabs. Oops. You have the tabs, and they're the ones that. Okay. So now this is kind of the nut that holds the whole car together. So that's got to be on there pretty tight, unlike the other ones. And so I see the part number, and I see an on, I see an off right here. Can't quite tell which way the arrow is pointing, but I'm going to believe that off is that way. So that's going to make it a right-hand thread. And that is undone with this special tool, a pin spanner. So you have the relief holes for the studs, and then you have the pins that engage into the nut. So we're going to put that in there. There enough. Now, so that's the culprit, that's the nut. It looks like somebody's been not too friendly with it since they bent the studs a little bit. But that's what it looks like. Parts bucket goes. Oh, look at that. This is loose enough that we don't need a puller. Well, at least that's what I was thinking. Huh. Which again, sometimes you get lucky and sometimes you don't. So let's go ahead and get her off of here. So, of course, this hub drum assembly is a little more substantial than the front. Okay, and that's what we have. How about that? So these shoes, these outer ones, are for the handbrake, parking brake. And then inner ones are for the foot brake. So I will take the camera off the mount and give you a little tour of it. Okay. Ooh. So that's what we got looking like in there, all kinds of grungy, goopy stuff. Looking at the lining for the handbrake, you know, again, this side by side. This side by side setup was started in the very late Phantom 1s, carried on to the Phantom 2s. You can see we're getting pretty close to the rivets. There's some meat on there, but you know. This is the adjuster. And we're going to take you over to the drum so you can see inside of that. So this is the inner driving dog spline. This is the actual thread for what holds the hub on. And here we got the inside of the drum, the hub. Again, this one is held on with this retaining nut. That's what holds the bearings and all that in there. That has a locking plate. And again, you can see it's a pretty substantial piece. They weren't fooling when it came to brakes.